The town of Dry Creek was the kind of place where people kept their curtains drawn after dark. A handful of houses stretched along the road like tired teeth, most of them sagging with age, their paint peeled by decades of winters. It was the kind of town that survived by forgetting things. Accidents, tragedies, the quiet stories nobody wanted to speak aloud. Leah had lived there her whole life. She'd learned to ignore the whispers about the woods at the edge of town, the ones that stretched for miles and swallowed light. But since her sister had come home, Leah had begun to hear those whispers again, only this time, they were inside her own house. Gail had been in the accident 3 months earlier. No one really knew the details. A crash on a back road, her car found at the bottom of a ravine. When she returned from the hospital, her face was hidden beneath thick bandages that never seemed to come off. The doctors had told Leah that her sister was lucky to be alive, but Gail wasn't the same. At first, Leah tried to take care of her, tried to coax her into eating, talking, laughing the way they used to. But Gail barely spoke, and when she did, it was only strange, broken sounds that scraped the air like nails on wood. Then there were the nights. Every evening, just after midnight, Leah would hear the door creak open. She would lie frozen in her bed, watching from the corner of her eye as Gail drifted down the hallway. Her movements slow, jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings. Gail would walk out into the yard, then vanish into the woods, gone for hours before returning just before dawn. Leah tried to follow once. She had crept outside in her robe, her breath fogging the cold air, and watched Gail disappear into the black line of trees. The silence that followed was suffocating. She had taken one step closer, then another, and then she'd heard it. A voice calling her name, soft and wrong, as if spoken from behind her teeth. She had fled back inside, slamming the door and locking it twice. Since then, Leah had been afraid even to look her sister in the eye. Desperate, she wrote an email. She didn't know who else to turn to. She wrote about the accident, about Gail's return, about the nights in the woods, about the fear that grew heavier every time she heard her sister's footsteps passing her door. "I don't feel safe," she typed. "Please help me. I think something horrible has happened to my sister." She pressed send, then sat in the glow of her laptop until dawn, wondering if anyone would ever believe her. 2 nights later, a car pulled into her driveway. 2 men stepped out, one tall with calm eyes, the other shorter, more jittery, carrying a camera bag slung over his shoulder. They introduced themselves as Parker and Chester. Leah felt foolish opening the door, as if she were dragging strangers into her madness. But when she looked over her shoulder and saw Gail's bandaged figure standing at the top of the stairs, head tilted, unmoving, she knew she had done the right thing. "Thank you for coming," Leah whispered, her voice shaking. Behind her, the house seemed to exhale, its windows dark as sockets, its walls groaning in the autumn wind. Somewhere above them, a floorboard creaked, though Gail had not moved. The night was only beginning. The men entered Leah's house as though they were stepping into a tomb. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something faintly metallic like blood left too long in the air. Chester wrinkled his nose and muttered under his breath. But Parker pressed forward, calm as ever, his eyes scanning the space. Leah guided them into the living room, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's upstairs. She doesn't come down much anymore. Not unless it's to leave at night." Parker set his equipment down on the coffee table and leaned forward. "Tell us about her. Since the accident." Leah clasped her hands together, nails biting into her palms. She came back broken. Her face, it's always bandaged, She won't let me touch them, won't let me see what's underneath. At first I thought it was shame, but it's more than that. She's changed. How do you mean? Parker asked. She doesn't eat with me. She doesn't sleep when I sleep. She makes noises, not words. And then every night, she goes into the woods. Chester shifted uneasily. What's she doing out there? Leah shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know. I don't want to know. But I hear her whispering when she comes back. Sometimes she stands outside my door, listening. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. All three froze. The sound was slow, deliberate, as though someone wanted them to know they were being heard. Parker rose, his expression unreadable. Maybe we should introduce ourselves. Leah's eyes widened. No, please. She doesn't like strangers. But the men were already moving toward the stairs. The hallway was darker than it should have been. The bulbs overhead flickered, as if straining against the shadows pressing in from every corner. At the end of the hall, a door stood half open. From within came a faint rustling, like fabric dragging across the floor. Parker knocked gently. Gail? My name is Parker. Your sister invited us here because she's worried about you. We just want to make sure you're all right. The rustling stopped. Silence stretched. Then came a low moan, soft and warped, as if spoken through water. Chester swallowed hard. Jesus. The door creaked wider. The figure inside shifted, rising slowly from a chair near the window. Gail turned toward them, her face hidden beneath thick layers of white bandages. Only her eyes showed through two dark hollows, glistening wetly in the faint light. She did not speak. She did not move closer. She only stared. Parker forced a calm smile. We won't bother you. We're just here to help Leah. Gail tilted her head, the bandages sagging slightly at her jaw, revealing a glimpse of skin that looked wrong. Gray, mottled, stretched too tight. Chester tugged at Parker's sleeve. We should go. They retreated downstairs, Leah waiting at the bottom, trembling. I told you, she whispered. She doesn't want anyone here. That night, they set up cameras, one in the living room, another in Leah's room, one in the hall, and, despite Leah's protests, one just inside Gail's door. Chester gagged at the smell inside rot and earth, thick enough to sting his eyes. He placed the camera on the dresser, glancing once more at the chair by the window. Empty now. The bandages she had worn earlier lay on the floor, soaked through with something dark. When he came back out, his face was pale. We shouldn't be here, he muttered. Parker ignored him. We'll see what happens tonight. They retired to the guest room. The house groaned as though shifting in its sleep. Leah's sobs carried faintly down the hallway. Around midnight, the first sounds began. The hallway camera showed Gail's door opening. Slowly, she emerged. Her bandages were gone. The camera caught only glimpses of her face, but what it showed was wrong skin, sunken and puckered, lips torn, jaw shifting as if unhinged. She moved down the hall in jerks, her limbs bending too stiffly, like branches in a storm. She stopped outside Leah's door. The footage showed her pressing her ear to the wood, standing there for long minutes, listening. Then her lips parted. The microphone picked up a whisper. It was Leah's name, repeated over and over, soft as a prayer, but not in Gail's voice. It was too deep, too layered, as if several voices spoke at once. Finally, she moved on, down the stairs, out into the yard. The camera by the back door caught her crossing into the woods. She did not walk so much as glide, her body unnaturally fluid, like she was being pulled by something ahead. Inside the guest room, Chester sat bolt upright. "Did you hear that?" he hissed. Parker was already awake, clutching the handheld camera. A noise echoed through the house, the slam of a door, followed by a dragging sound. They hurried into the hall. Leah's bedroom door was ajar. "Leah?" Parker called. No answer. Inside, the bed was empty. The sheets were thrown back. The window opened to the night. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the faint scent of soil and decay. Chester leaned out the window. "She's gone." Christ! She went after her. The woods loomed beyond the yard, a black mass of branches and shadows. From somewhere deep within came the faintest sound, laughter, thin and cracked, followed by Leah's voice crying out. Parker grabbed his arm. "We can't go out there. Not unprepared." Chester's voice broke. "She's just a girl. We can't leave her." But before Parker could answer, a shape moved at the edge of the trees. Two figures stood side by side, half hidden in the dark. One tall and crooked, one smaller, both swaying slightly as if to music only they could hear. Then, slowly, they turned and vanished, deeper into the woods. The men stood frozen, the night swallowing the last trace of them. The night seemed to breathe around them. Parker and Chester stood in the yard, staring at the black mouth of the forest. The figures were gone now, swallowed by the trees. But the sound lingered faint, almost delicate, like Leah's voice echoing in a cavern. "Parker," Chester whispered. "She's in there. We have to go." Parker's jaw clenched. He wanted to say no, to say they'd done enough, but the image of Leah's terrified face rose in his mind. He couldn't leave her. They armed themselves with what little they had: a flashlight, the camera, and the kitchen knife Chester still carried. The grass was wet with dew as they crossed the yard. The forest loomed ahead, every branch clawing at the sky like black fingers. The moment they stepped inside, the world changed. The sounds of the town, faint as they had been, vanished completely. No crickets, no wind, no rustle of leaves, just silence, vast and suffocating. Their footsteps sank into soft earth, each one louder than the last. The beam of the flashlight cut through the trees, catching glimpses of movement, a shadow darting between trunks, a pale flicker that disappeared when they turned. "Leah!" Parker called. His voice was swallowed by the dark. No answer. They pressed on, deeper. The woods seemed endless, twisting, every tree the same. Chester stumbled, cursing, his hands shaking as he adjusted the camera. "This is insane," he muttered. "We shouldn't be here." Then they heard it. A low hum, rising and falling, like a chant. They followed the sound until the trees opened into a clearing. At the center stood Gail. Her bandages were gone. In the pale moonlight, her face was revealed at last, if it could still be called a face. Her skin was pale, waxen, stretched tight over bone. Her mouth hung open, wider than natural, lips cracked, teeth too sharp. Her eyes gleamed, black and wet, reflecting the light like a predator's. Leah stood beside her, though "stood" was not the right word. She swayed, limp as a marionette, her head tilted unnaturally to one side. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her lips moving in time with Gail's chant. "Leah!" Parker shouted. For a heartbeat, she seemed to hear him. Her gaze flicked toward them, her mouth parting as if to speak. But Gail's hand shot out, clutching her sister's arm with fingers too long, too tight. Leah's voice died in her throat. Chester gagged. "What the hell is she doing to her?" Gail turned slowly toward them. Her movements were stiff, jerky, but deliberate. Her lips twisted into a parody of a smile. When she spoke, It was not a single voice, but many, layered, echoing in the clearing. "She belongs to me now." The words reverberated inside their skulls. Parker staggered, clutching his head. Chester screamed, raising the knife. Gail moved, not fast, but wrong, her limbs bending sideways, her body sliding forward without sound. She loomed over them, taller than before, her shadow blotting out the moonlight. Parker dragged Chester back. "Run!" They bolted into the trees, branches whipping their faces, roots snagging their feet. Behind them came the sound of something following, not footsteps, but the crack of wood splintering, as if the forest itself bent out of her way. The flashlight flickered. For an instant, it illuminated Leah's face ahead, pale and blank, eyes glowing faintly. Parker reached for her, but his hand met only air. She dissolved into shadow. "Keep moving!" he shouted, but Chester tripped. He hit the ground hard, the camera skidding into the dirt. Parker turned just in time to see Gail's shape emerging from the dark. Her face splitting wider, jaw unhinging, blackness spilling from her mouth like smoke. "Get up!" Parker screamed, hauling Chester to his feet. They stumbled back toward the clearing, desperate. But when they burst through the trees, the clearing was empty. Gail and Leah were gone. Only the sound remained, the chant, echoing faintly from every direction, as though the forest itself was speaking. Chester collapsed, gasping. "We can't fight this. We have to get out." Parker's chest heaved. He knew Chester was right, but leaving Leah, leaving both sisters, felt like betrayal. He looked once more at the trees, their branches swaying though there was no wind. And for the first time in years, he felt true fear claw at his spine. "Let's go," he said. They ran until the trees thinned, until the house came into view again. But the windows were dark now, the walls silent, as though it had been abandoned for years. Inside, Leah's room was empty. Gail's room was empty. The bandages on the floor were gone. Only the cameras remained, still recording, their red lights blinking in the dark. When they checked the footage later, their stomachs turned. The hallway camera showed Leah opening her door, eyes vacant, her body moving stiffly as though pulled by invisible hands. Gail waited in the shadows, her face pressed close to the lens for a moment, revealing a grotesque smile before the screen turned black. The living room camera caught the sisters leaving together, stepping into the yard, hand in hand. But as they crossed into the trees, Leah turned her head. She looked directly at the camera. Her eyes were no longer her own. The screen went dark. The house felt like a carcass when they returned. Parker and Chester stood in the living room, the silence pressing down on them. The cameras blinked faintly, their quiet hum the only proof that time still moved forward. The air was colder than before, carrying a dampness that clung to their skin. Leah's belongings were scattered across the couch, a sweater folded neatly, a mug half full of cold tea. It was as though she had simply stepped out for a moment, not vanished into the woods with her sister. But Parker knew better. He had seen her eyes. Chester paced the floor, muttering under his breath. "We shouldn't have come. We should have left the second we saw her face. This is beyond us, man. This isn't something you fix." Parker rubbed his temples. His calm facade had cracked. Sweat lined his brow, and his hands shook when he reached for the laptop. "We came because she asked for help," he said quietly. "We can't just leave her." "Look around you," Chester snapped. "She's gone. They're both gone. Whatever's in those woods has them now. Do you want to end up like them?" A noise cut through their argument. A faint creak. The sound of weight shifting upstairs. Chester froze. No. I'm not going back up there. But Parker was already moving toward the staircase. Each step groaned beneath his weight, as though the house itself wanted to warn him away. The hall above stretched longer than he remembered, the shadows clinging thicker. Gail's door was open. He stepped inside. The room was stripped bare. The dresser was empty, the chair by the window overturned. Only the smell remained, that sour stench of rot and soil. Parker turned to leave, but then he heard it. A whisper, so soft it seemed to crawl directly into his ear. "She belongs to me now." He spun, but the room was empty. The shadows rippled once, like breath across the walls, and then stilled. He fled downstairs, heart hammering. Chester looked at him, pale and shaking. "You heard it too, didn't you?" Parker didn't answer. He only grabbed the cameras, shoving them back into their cases. "We're leaving," he said. They drove through the night, the house shrinking behind them, its windows dark and empty. Neither man spoke. The road stretched endlessly, but still Parker kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see two figures standing at the edge of the forest, watching them go. By dawn, they stopped at a diner on the outskirts of town. The fluorescent lights buzzed, too bright, too normal. Chester collapsed into a booth, his hands still trembling. "What do we tell people?" he asked. "What do we say happened to them?" "Oh." Parker stared into his coffee. He could still hear Leah's voice in the woods, still see the way Gail's face had twisted beneath the bandages. "We don't tell anyone," he said. "No one would believe us. They'll just disappear, like they never existed." Chester laughed bitterly. "And what about us? You think we can just forget?" Parker didn't answer. That night, in the cheap motel where they slept, Parker dreamed. He was back in the clearing. Gail stood in front of him, her face open and broken, her mouth stretching too wide. Leah was beside her, eyes black, her hand reaching toward him. "Come with us," she whispered. He woke with a start, the sheets damp with sweat. Chester was snoring softly in the other bed, but Parker could have sworn he saw a shadow crouched in the corner of the room, watching. When he blinked, it was gone. They never returned to Dry Creek. Weeks later, the local news reported that the sisters had been declared missing. Neighbors said the house had been abandoned, the doors locked, the windows boarded. Some whispered about strange noises from the woods, chanting, laughter, screams carried on the wind. No one investigated too closely. In towns like Dry Creek, forgetting was easier. But Parker and Chester could not forget. The footage they carried with them was proof, though they kept it hidden, buried on hard drives they swore never to open again. Proof that sometimes, when someone comes back from an accident, they don't come back alone, and that sometimes the bond between sisters can be twisted into something unholy. Life returned to normal for everyone else. In Dry Creek, the house was left to rot. The bank nailed plywood across the doors and windows, weeds swallowing the yard. To passing drivers, it was just another abandoned place in a dying town. The neighbors learned not to mention Leah or Gail. Their names dissolved into silence, like the accident that had started it all. But Parker and Chester could not forget. 2 weeks after leaving, Chester called Parker in the middle of the night. His voice shook. "I keep seeing her," he whispered. "Leah, she's in my dreams. Sometimes she's standing at the foot of my bed. Sometimes she's calling me into the woods. I wake up and my window's open. Parker, I don't know if I'm losing it." Parker didn't tell him that he had been dreaming too, that he heard chanting when he closed his eyes, words he couldn't understand but felt in his bones. That sometimes, in the silence before dawn, he swore he heard bandages rustling in the corner of his apartment. They had carried the footage away with them, sealed in a case. They promised never to watch it again, but Parker, restless and sleepless, broke that promise one night. He set up the laptop in the dark and clicked play. The hallway footage, the clearing, the last glimpse of Leah's eyes before the screen went black. But when he reached the end of the file, something new appeared. A clip he didn't remember recording. It showed his own living room. The date stamp was from the night before. In the clip, Parker was asleep on the couch, chest rising and falling. Behind him, the door opened slowly. A figure stepped inside. Bandages, white and soaked through. A face that wasn't a face. The figure stood over him for nearly a minute, unmoving. Then, in a voice cracked and layered, it whispered, "Come with us." The screen went dark. Parker slammed the laptop shut, his heart pounding. He told himself it was a glitch, some corrupted file. But the next morning, the door to his apartment was unlocked. Chester stopped answering calls a month later. Parker drove to his place once, found the apartment empty, the door wide open, camera equipment scattered across the floor. The neighbors said they'd seen him leave late at night, heading toward the edge of the woods. He never came back. Parker filed a report, but nothing came of it. Missing persons. Like Leah, like Gail. Sometimes, when Parker drove through small towns, he thought he saw them two women standing by the tree line, pale and swaying, eyes gleaming in the dark. Always gone when he looked twice. In Dry Creek, children still whispered about the woods. They dared each other to step onto the lot where the sister's house had stood. Some swore they heard voices calling their names. A few said they saw bandaged figures watching from the tree line. Most never went back. One evening, months after it had all begun, Parker sat alone in his apartment, staring at the window. The sun had set, and the glass reflected only his own tired face. But as he watched, another face appeared beside his bandaged, grinning, eyes like wet pits. He didn't turn around. He only closed his eyes, and for the first time, he whispered back, "I hear you." The room filled with silence, thick and waiting. Somewhere, faint and familiar, came the sound of bandages dragging across the floor, moving closer.